Alright, let me take you to a dusty little shooting range out in Arizona, middle of nowhere, where the sun's beating down like it's got a personal grudge, and the air smells like gunpowder and regret. This is where Sarah Kane showed up one scorching afternoon, looking like she'd just rolled out of a thrift store, faded flannel, scuffed up boots, hair tied back in a messy knot that said she didn't care what you thought. The crowd, mostly retired cops, some ex-Marines, and a few wannabe influencers with shiny gear, took one look and started whispering, smirking, figuring she was some lost soul who'd wandered into their turf by mistake. See, Sarah wasn't what you'd call a regular at places like this. She stepped out of an old pickup, her fingers curled around a worn leather cord in her pocket, tied to a small brass key her sister Ellie's, from years back when they were kids running wild on their dad's sprawling ranch. Ellie was her shadow, always tagging along, cheering like crazy when Sarah nailed a bullseye at 15 under their dad's hawk-like stare. Colonel Kane wasn't big on hugs, but when Sarah hit that perfect shot, he'd given her this half-smile, like she'd earned a piece of his steel heart. Ellie'd been the one clapping, her laugh louder than the cicadas. But 4 years ago, a car crash on a desert highway took Ellie, left Sarah clutching that key, her hands shaking as she pulled it from the wreckage. This range. It was the last place they'd laughed together, back when life felt unbreakable. Sarah came here today to feel that again, to hold on to something that wasn't just grief. As she crossed the gravel lot, a white SUV pulled up, all polished and screaming money. Out stepped Lauren, mid-30s, decked out in designer tactical gear, her blonde hair perfect, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She was a YouTube star, 500,000 subs, always filming, always performing. Spotting Sarah, she called out, "Yo, you sure you're in the right place? This ain't the thrift shop." The guys nearby, big dudes in tactical vests, boots shine like they were auditioning for a movie, laughed, eating it up. Sarah paused, her hand still on that key, and glanced at Lauren. Just for a second, her sleeve slipped, showing a faint scar across her forearm, a jagged line from a night nobody here knew about. Lauren's grin twitched, but she tossed her hair and turned back to her phone, already filming. Sarah kept walking, her steps steady, her fingers brushing that scar, a quiet reminder of fights she'd never post online. The range was a concrete slab carved into the desert, hills swallowing every sound like they were keeping secrets. It was an open chute, pulling in all types, ex-cops, military vets, rich guys chasing a thrill they'd paid a fortune for. Sarah stepped up, her flannel flapping in the breeze, looking like she'd just finished a shift at a diner. A guy named Mitch, ex-Marine with a buzz cut and a smirk that said he owned the place, leaned over to his buddy Jake, a burly deputy with a chip on his shoulder. "Who let the hipster in?" Mitch said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Jake snorted, his voice carrying, "Hope she knows which end of the gun to point." The crowd chuckled, and then there was Mia, a 20-something vlogger with a tactical cap and a live stream going. "Oh, this is gonna be good," she said into her phone, zooming in on Sarah as she signed in. "Check out this newbie thinking she's John Wick." The laughs got louder, like they were all in on the same joke. Sarah's hand paused on the sign-up sheet, her pen hovering. She glanced at Mia, her eyes calm but sharp, like she was reading her soul. Then, without a word, she finished signing Sarah Kane, each letter clean, like she was carving it into stone. Mia's laugh faltered when Sarah's gaze lingered a beat too long, but she played it off, flipping her cap back. The range boss, Frank, a grizzled guy in his 50s with a face like weathered leather, checked her ID. His eyes narrowed, just for a second, like he'd seen something he wasn't expecting. He didn't say a word, though, just turned to a young staffer, some kid named Tim who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and said, "Get her the old M110, the one in the back." Tim blinked, probably because that rifle was a beast, heavy, prone to jamming, not something you'd hand to a rookie. Sarah just nodded, like she'd been offered a cup of coffee instead of a test. When she went to check the rifle, a guy named Ron, a retired detective with a beer gut and a habit of talking over everyone, got in her face. "You sure you can handle that, sweetheart?" he said, his coffee breath hitting her like a cloud. "That thing's heavier than you." The crowd laughed, a few clapping like it was a comedy show. Sarah's fingers paused on the rifle's bolt, her eyes flicking to Ron. "I've carried heavier," she said, her voice low, like a knife sliding into place. Ron's grin froze, and he backed off, muttering about attitude. Sarah went back to the rifle, her hands moving with a precision that made Tim stop fidgeting for a second. Mitch wasn't done, though. He sauntered over, holding a rifle like it was his best friend, and shoved it into her hands. "Careful, darlin'," he said, loud enough for the whole range to hear. "This ain't your barista machine." The rifle was heavier than it needed to be, a deliberate jab. Sarah caught it, her arms dipping just a bit, and the crowd roared, thinking they'd won. A rich guy named Ethan, all designer sunglasses and a watch that screamed trust fund, called out, "Who let the waitress in?" His buddy Nate, a loudmouth with a fake tan, added, "Bet she's here to pick up the shells." Sarah set the rifle down, her fingers brushing the stock like it was something alive. She stepped back, waiting her turn, her boots scuffing the dirt. Frank watched her, his eyes lingering a little too long. Sarah stood at the edge of the range, staring out at the desert, her hand back on that key. Her jaw tightened. Just for a moment she wasn't here for their laughs, wasn't here to prove a damn thing to them. She was here for Ellie, for the promise she'd made to keep going, to not let the grief win. Years back, she and Ellie had sat on their dad's old truck bed after a day at a range just like this, eating PB&J sandwiches, laughing about how Ellie kept missing the target but swore she'd get it next time. "You're showing off again, Cobra," Ellie teased, tossing a pebble at her. Sarah had laughed, shoving her back, their voices mixing with the desert hum. That was before Ellie's crash, before Sarah left the army, before she buried her medals and her name. Now, standing in this heat, that key felt heavier than any rifle. When her name was called, Sarah stepped to the firing line, the M110 in her hands. Tim handed her a magazine, and she loaded it, her movements steady, not flashy. The first shot jammed big surprise with that old relic. She cleared it without blinking, her fingers moving like they knew the gun's secrets. The crowd snickered anyway. Ethan, leaning against a barrier, said, "Amateurs stay amateurs." Jake shouted, "Missed the target again, and just go home." Lauren, still filming, circled closer, her voice dripping like honey. "This is going to be a lesson in how to flop," she said, angling her phone for the perfect shot of Sarah's failure. The crowd's laughter rolled like a wave. Sarah's grip tightened, just for a second, before she relaxed. "Keep rolling," she said, so quiet Lauren barely heard it. Lauren's smile twitched, but she kept filming, her followers already typing laughing emojis. Sarah raised the rifle, her posture loose, almost too calm. She fired. The shot went wide, missing the main target by a mile. The crowd lost it louder, clapping. Ethan slow clapping like he was at a bad open mic. "Nice one," he called, aiming for the dirt. Sarah didn't turn. She adjusted the scope, her fingers precise, unnoticed. She fired again, the bullet sailing high, way above the target. Jake cupped his hands and yelled, "She's going for abstract art, not marksmanship." But Thina faint clank. A metal plate on a distant power pole dropped, swinging in the breeze. Frank stepped forward, his boots crunching, a small grin tugging at his lips. "Hold off on the jokes," he said, loud enough to hush the front row. "Wait and see." A few heads turned, confused, but the laughs kept coming. Sarah kept firing, her face blank, her hands steady. The crowd didn't notice how her shoulders stayed square, how her breath never faltered. A couple of older shooters guys who'd seen real combat exchanged looks, their smirks fading. The next shot missed the main target again, and the laughter hit a new high. Nate pulled out his phone, grinning. "This is meme gold," he said. But then, a faint ping echoed, and a puff of blue paint burst on a hillside, 900 yards out. Before anyone could react, Tim ran up to Frank, whispering fast. Frank nodded, then turned to the crowd. "Check the hill," he said, pointing. The group hesitated, but a few started walking, kicking up dust. When they got there, a paintball target unlisted, not part of the day's shoot, was split clean through. Tim stammered, That's not even on the map." Sarah didn't flinch, just reloaded, her movements smooth as water. The laughter thinned out, but not completely. Mia, still streaming, zoomed in on Sarah's boots. "Those shoes," she said, fake pity in her voice. "Maybe we should crowdfund her a new pair." The crowd chuckled, but it was weaker now. Sarah paused, picking up a spent casing, rolling it between her fingers. She looked at Mia, her eyes like a blade. "Save your cash," she said, dropping the casing into her pocket next to Ellie's key. Mia's phone dipped, her chat filling with question marks. Mitch had enough. He stormed up, grabbed the rifle from Sarah's hands. "Let me show you how it's done," he said, his voice thick with swagger. He fired a quick burst, hitting the main target dead center. The crowd hooped, Ethan slapping his back like he'd won the Super Bowl. "That's how you shoot," Ethan said. Sarah stepped back, her eyes narrowing, her arms crossed. Nate smirked at her. "Just watch and learn, kid." Then a quiet guy in his 60s, Walt, in a faded green jacket, spoke up. He'd been silent all day, watching Sarah like a hawk. "Nice shot," he said to Mitch, then nodded at Sarah. "But she's not shooting for claps." The crowd went quiet, heads turning. Walt pointed to the hills. "Those shots. Not luck." Sarah's fingers paused on the rifle, her gaze flicking to Walt. She gave a tiny nod, then went back to her scope. Frank raised a hand. "Everyone, walk with me," he said, pointing behind the targets. The group followed, grumbling, but his tone wasn't asking. When they got there, they froze. 3 hidden silhouette boards used for elite sniper drills, not public shoots, each had a single hole through a dime-sized mark. Sarah's shots. Frank looked at her, his voice low. "Welcome back, Cobra 7. The name hit like a thunderclap. Ethan's watch suddenly felt like a brick. Mitch's smirk vanished. Jake's phone went back in his pocket. Sarah just wiped her hands on her flannel, calm as ever. Nate wasn't buying it. He stepped up, his tin gleaming. "Lucky shots," he said, loud and cocky. "Let's see her do a moving target drill, prone, 30 seconds. Bet she chokes." The crowd rallied, their cheers egging him on. A woman named Diane, a range regular with a sharp tongue and a habit of bragging about her connections, pushed forward. "This is a joke," she said, like she was scolding a kid. "Why is she even here, wasting our time?" Sarah knelt, tying her boots, each loop tight. "Time's not yours to own," she said, so quiet Diane barely heard. Diane's face flushed, but she turned away, muttering about standards. Nate went first, prone, hitting 5 out of 10 moving targets. He stood, tossing the rifle to Sarah. "Top that," he said, grinning. Frank walked over with a black cloth, tying it over her eyes. The crowd murmured, confused. Sarah laid down, steady, like she'd done this in her sleep. The timer started. In 27 seconds, every target fell, each shot clean. The range went dead silent, just the wind howling. A corporate guy named Brad, who'd paid big to be here, laughed nervously. "Okay, neat trick," he said, his voice shaky. "But she's not one of us." He waved at her flannel, like it proved his point. Sarah pulled off the blindfold, folding it slow. She looked at Brad, her eyes steady. "Don't need to be," she said. The words cut clean through. Brad fidgeted with his keys, his laugh dying. Frank broke the silence. "She's the only one in the 2015 camp to set that record." Sarah met his eyes, a flicker of a smile crossing her face. "Can I get my coffee now?" she said. Nobody laughed this time. They stood, some looking away, others at the dirt. A young volunteer, Lily, nervous with a clipboard, approached Sarah. I found this," she said, holding out an old logbook, open to a page from 2015 with Sarah's name next to a record score. Sarah glanced at it, her fingers brushing the page, then handed it back. "Keep it safe," she said, her voice soft but firm. The crowd murmured, starting to piece it together. Years ago, Sarah and Ellie had been in a dusty Jeep, both in uniform, laughing about a drill where Ellie tripped over her own gear. "You're showing off, Cobra," Ellie had teased, tossing a pebble. Sarah had laughed, the desert stretching out around them. That was before the crash, before Sarah left the service, her record sealed. This range was where she felt Ellie most, where she'd promised to keep going. The mood shifted. Tim, the staffer, came up, his face red. "I didn't know," he stammered, offering a water bottle like an apology. Sarah took it, nodded, kept walking. Ethan was on his phone, deleting a post he'd started. Jake stood off to the side, his scowl gone. Mitch stared at the targets, his hands clenched. Then a new voice cut through. Sarah Kane, a man in a suit, older, with a military buzz cut, said, "Colonel Kane's daughter." Heads turned. Sarah paused, her hand on the bottle, but didn't answer. The man nodded. "Your dad would be proud." A range worker, Joe, with grease-stained hands, approached, holding a small pin shaped like a cobra. "Found this in the locker," he said. Sarah took it, her fingers tracing it, her lips tight. She slipped it next to Ellie's key and nodded. Sarah sat on a bench, pulling out a photo of her and Ellie in front of their dad's truck, grinning like they'd just stolen the moon. She traced the edge, her face unreadable. Frank leaned against the bench. "You didn't have to come back," he said. Sarah shrugged. Felt right. She pocketed the photo, her fingers lingering on the key and pin. Then a low rumble broke the quiet. A black SUV rolled in, steady, deliberate. A man stepped out, tall, broad, quiet power in every step. Sarah's husband, Jack. The crowd parted without thinking. Ethan dropped his phone. Jake found his gear very interesting. Mitch's jaw tightened. Lauren, still clutching her phone, tried to play it cool. "Plot twist," she said, her laugh thin, her hand shaky. Sarah stood, brushing off her flannel. "Turn it off," she said, her voice calm but final. Lauren's phone dropped, her stream going dark. Jack stopped beside Sarah, his hand on her shoulder. Her face softened, just for a moment. The range felt the weight of who they were. Sarah didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. The fallout hit fast. Ethan's post mocking Sarah got buried under comments tearing him apart. His gear sponsor dropped him by nightfall. Jake got a call from his sheriff. His captain wasn't happy about his comments, and he was on desk duty by Monday. Mitch's buddies stopped texting. His name wasn't welcome at the range anymore. Lauren's stream backfired when viewers dug up an old article about Cobra 7. Her gun brand sponsor pulled out. Her inbox flooded with hate. Mia's vlog never went live. Her agency cut her loose. Diane's connections ghosted her. Her range pass was revoked. The truth hit like a slow bullet, steady and unforgiving. Sarah and Jack walked to the SUV, her flannel still faded, her boots still worn. She didn't gloat, didn't turn back. Frank watched her go, a faint smile on his face. He'd known who she was from the start. Cobra 7 didn't need to prove herself, she never had. As the SUV pulled away, the desert stretched out, quiet and endless. Sarah leaned back, her hand on the key and pin. The day's weight settled, but she wasn't alone. She'd come for Ellie, for the promise, for the memory. And she'd done it. Nobody saw her coming, not the crowd, not the mockers, maybe not even herself. But they saw her now. Here's the thing, it's not just about Sarah. It's about that moment when the world sizes you up, decides you're nothing, and you keep walking anyway. You felt it, right? That sting when someone underestimates you. But you hold steady, let the truth do the talking. Who's misjudged you? Where were you when you proved them wrong? Drop it in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button. Let's keep telling these stories together about the quiet ones, the fighters, the ones who don't need to shout to be heard.